really trust when it actually starts recording, but I reckon it's live now. So we're going to go through the Keirsey logistical intellect. But first of all, I want to show people what Keirsey wrote about the Guardians. And this is sort of consistent with his self-typing of INTP. And for the socionics people out there, and the way they define TI as structural logic, he had the Keirsey NTPs predisposed to constructing models and designs. So there's your structural logic. So I'll just say this, if someone's watching on a mobile device, looking back, I must say that most of my friends have been and still are Guardians. At school, all through the 12th grade, such was the case. Oh, the 12th grade, such was the case. And this was true even during flight training in World War II, for I was invariably drawn to the Guardians rather than the artisans, who were too reckless for my taste. In my own fighter squadron, my buddy and wingman was a Guardian. And when working for public schools after the war, my friends and tennis partners were invariably Guardian administrators, though diametrically opposite in temperament from me, in that Guardians are concrete in speech and cooperative in means, and NTs are abstract in speech and adaptive in means. More do things their own way rather than be by the book and trust authority. And when working for public schools after the war, he did that because he was actually working with unruly schoolboys. And he was talking to the parents and to the teachers, because he had a lot of experience. And then it was like 50 years later, he wrote, "Please understand me." When was that? 70 years. Actually, that'd be about 30 years later. 50 years later, he wrote this book, "Please Understand Me Too." So 50 years of experience. And then personology was 12 years after that. And he actually trained diagnosticians and counselors of dysfunctional behavior. So he was a proper educational psychologist. So when working for public schools after the war, my friends and tennis partners were invariably Guardian administrators. Oh yes, and straight after the war, he said he had to get a job counseling juvenile delinquents because it was like the only one available. They're right, domestic opposite. Temperament for me, I admire Guardians for their logistical capabilities, my short suit, and for their abiding social interest and constant dependability. I like them and appreciate them for what they are, the pillars of society. So, those people out there who maybe think Keirsey was INTJ or I, there's a little bit of counter evidence. Plus, I know it's a bit of a digression, but it's where's Keirsey's coming from in describing the SJs. In the original book, I think what happened with Keirsey is that he got annoyed by all the Myers-Briggs people and all of the sort of like mutterings of lawsuits and things like that. And his son said that his father actually wrote a lot of the profiles and they got assimilated by the MBTI people. But what is interesting, in 1978, he actually wrote differently about functions and he actually had duality in 1978. So he has a section where he writes about INTP with ESFJ. So we've got here, and it's got the section in mating and temperament. He's got it in there. And so this is where he gives his thoughts on duality. Philosopher, architect, and then so why would this abstraction all find the ESFJ attractive? And then all these other things. And then so he discusses duality, and then he suggests an alternate pairing of INTP with ENFJ. Now he might have done that because he was married to an ENFJ resembler. And what he said of this was interesting. So, like I said, there was a lot of, at the time he was getting old in the 80s, and because he was born in 1921, that there was a lot of pushback from the MBTI people and people online, and he wasn't that interested in confronting it. And so, but the way he wrote about Jung in 1978 gives you this paragraph will give you an idea of what he thought about Jung and functions in 1978, which was different from this book, where he's more negative on functions for systems theory reasons. And that's something I need to pick Amanda's brain about, because she's interested in systems theory. Jonathan, do you want to read that out, that middle paragraph?
In taking our cue from Kretschmer and the temperament hypothesis, we must abandon Jung's idea of functions. But in giving up Jung's functions, we must not abandon his behavior descriptions, for they have great productive value. By knowing a person's type, we can anticipate rather accurately what he will do most of the time. This is not something to give up lightly, so it is not so much that the function type is abandoned, but rather subordinated to the concept of temperament, the latter having a much wider range of convenience as an explainer of behavior.
Yeah. So that's pretty. Just wanted folks to know sort of like his evolution of thought, and that's sort of where I am as well. I like to put functions in context of temperament.
By the way, why me?
Why me? Wait, I think I'm just used to asking you to read stuff out, Jonathan.
I don't think I've done that for a while.
Maybe it's just I don't know. It's just force of habit.
That was lovely. That was great.
Yeah.
It was. It's because you have the best accent, that's why.
Yeah. I'm just glad I wasn't picked on.
I wonder if we could, that would be an interesting survey of those Americans that can and can't understand Jonathan. Is it a type related aspect to it? Do the ISFJs understand him?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Right then, so we're gonna go on right then, I'll read. Right, does anyone want to read through this? Do you want to read through or do you think I should read through it?
You do you.
Okay. Okay. Yep. And I'll stop at any moment if I could maybe ask a question, see if somebody wants to comment on a certain thing. Logistics is the procurement, distribution, service, and replacement of material goods. Logistics is vital to the success of any institution, a business, a household, a school, an army. And guardians can be enormously creative in seeing to it that the right personnel have the right supplies in the right place at the right time to get the job done. So, is that true of I'll go to you, Jamie. Is that true of you? That?
Yeah, actually, I thought it would be helpful for both me and Natalie to talk a little bit about like our job history.
Yeah.
Like I've spent a lot of time in archives and museums, and the whole idea is handling materials, and like people will send us like research requests. We'll have to get certain items out. There's always like a time limit on things, you know, in terms of like when a new I don't know, exhibit is supposed to be ready. You know, you have to be aware of the materials you have, the timing, who needs what when, and that seems to really apply to this.
Yeah, and I think you said before we came on air that did you want to talk about that thing that you said that you wanted to run, or you had an idea of running?
A bed and breakfast, yeah. I just think it would be fun. Plus, it's all stuff I could handle. You know, it's cleaning, it's making sure the schedules are good, making sure like breakfast is made at a certain time. It's somewhat repetitive, but you're still dealing with people and just trying to meet their needs, really.
Right. Jonathan, does that fit your mother as well?
I would say yes, but she complains about we're not helping her as much as we should be. But
I would just like to show, because obviously this is something which gender role socialization comes in a lot. Like, so trying to see guys who are like this can be hard if they're not in these roles. I usually show this because I find it funny. Okay, it might be too hard to get to, but it's a guy on a beach, and it's a photo of this guy enjoying himself picking up litter. And I call him Mr. SI Man. And he's sort of writing on Amazon that it's very SI in that, you know, when I'm picking up rubbish on the beach that these strangers have left around, spoiling the environment, I don't want to bend over. It hurts my back. And so I like to use, and he uses this little grabber to like pick up the rubbish. And he calls it, and he called his review Litter Picking Heaven. And like, he had this big smile on his face. And I thought, this guy is an SFJ. So I bring that up because sometimes it can be harder to see male SFJs because of gender role socialization. They tend to hide some of these kind of more aspects of themselves that are more traditionally associated with their maternal attitude.
Well, even if you think about someone who works in a warehouse, they're doing a lot of this too.
Oh yeah, that kind of stuff. Yeah. And we'll get onto that later on, where you've got two kinds of logistics, like the stuff that's to do with objects and then the stuff to do with people, or people folk, or in case of ESFJ, it's objects for people, food and clothing for the people in order to get. Anyway, so even though SJs can develop skills in the other.
Wait, did Natalie want to tell us?
Oh, sorry, Natalie, I'm terrible.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, I guess like I kind of relate to what Jamie said, like with my job history and everything. Right now I work in a library, but it's a lot of like helping people pay fines, helping them find books. Yeah, just like working with materials. But I thought it was interesting that in my studies, and this is true for Jamie as well, we both kind of gravitated to the humanities, which was something that I noticed reading over those pages that you sent us. Apparently the NFs are more, they gravitate towards like the humanities.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it already been, I've always been drawn to that more so than like business or anything like that. But in my work, I gravitate towards working with materials.
I'll tell you what, I'll follow up on that, Natalie. In the humanities, what kinds of things in the humanities are you interested in, and what particular aspects of it? Say, if it's a particular kind of writing, what aspects of that writing do you like?
I would say very character-driven type things. That's the kind of fiction I generally tend to like. Stuff with like a, I don't know, just an interesting style of writing. Like the concept of a book could be really good, but if the style of writing is boring to me, I won't read it. I don't know, I minored in psychology, so I like just learning about people, I guess.
Right.
Anything to do with people.
Yeah, that could be a general feeling introvert thing. And I'll follow up. Why are you interested in learning about people? Or is it just one of these things which is like an ultimate given? Are you just interested in learning about people, or are you interested in learning about people for other reasons?
I guess to learn, well, one of the things that drew me to like Myers-Briggs and everything when I first started learning about typology was it helps me interact with people better, and it helped a lot with my social anxiety, I guess, because then I could be like, you know, instead of being afraid of talking to someone, I could be like, oh, well, I wonder what type they are, and like kind of place them in a system and like just be more curious about them, I guess. And it was just really interesting. I don't know what else. Yeah, I guess just learning how to interact.
Yeah, practical purpose. Yeah. Right then. What I'll do in future is I'll go down the list because it's got the squares at the side, and I'll keep to that order. Have you read, Natalie? Have you read A Song of Ice and Fire novels?
No.
Right. Okay. Do you like sensory description in novels?
Sometimes. Yeah, generally. I don't know. I guess like if it goes on for paragraphs and paragraphs with just like sensory description, it does get boring, but I do I like some of that.
No.
Like I couldn't really relate when people would complain in school about how like, you know, Charles Dickens or somebody was just going on and there's so much description. I was like, oh, I kind of like that. I don't really mind it.
Do you think it could be, if it's set in the present, could it be, hey, I don't know, I don't need a description of that, I know what it looks like. But say if it's historical or if it's science fiction-y, are you more likely to think, okay, I want to know what this world looks like and feels like and touch and sounds like?
I think that's like a struggle with my own writing too, because like I have an idea for a fantasy novel that I want to write, but I don't know what, like I want it to look a certain way, but I don't know how to describe that because I've never seen it. And so, yeah, like I guess when I'm reading more of that type of stuff, I do like more description.
Well, Jonathan might be able to help you out there, because you might say, oh, I want it to look like this. You might, well, if you go and see this movie and this movie and this movie, it might stimulate your imagination, because he's a bit of a movie buff as well as an Enneagram buff.
Nice. Yeah, I really admire people who can like create a world that's original and interesting. But I also don't tend to gravitate towards the type of writing that is just describing the world. Like it has to be character driven. So
Are you similar, Jamie, in that?
Yeah, I like the drama. I want to know what these people have to go through, you know?
That's something that Jeff said about Guardians watching soaps. And the soaps are filled with artisans just doing silly stuff.
It's entertaining, but it's also like, why would you ever make that decision? Like, make the right decision first, so you never have to go through this.
When you see a soap in England, it's like 1 or 2 characters out of 50 are Guardians. It's so few.
Well, yeah, I mean, soap operas in general, it's a lot of people cheating on their spouses, and I'm just like, you made this commitment. What are you doing? I'm judging you right now. Like, stop.
It gives me this like cringe reaction when I see people making really bad decisions. I'm like, oh, why?
Right. Yeah. No.
So we got here. And I color coded this. So you got blue for Guardian, orange for Artisan, SP, NF stuff in green, and pink is usually stuff that I find funny, or it's for some other reason. NTs are in purple, for strategy. When I said that, Jeff was not happy because purple's his favorite color and he wanted purple for the artisans, and so I said, tough, you're not having purple. You're getting orange. Right. Even though SJs can develop skills in the other 3 spheres of activity, tactics, strategy, and diplomacy. Okay, I'll quickly say what tactics is. In Keirsey's, it's basically being expedient, like STP is. Like in a crisis, you'll be able to solve something quickly without following the rules. It's what's to hand in this particular situation. The best at improvising in a crisis, usually with objects, but it's also, it can, especially more towards like ISTP with objects. In the old school, it would be like mechanics, but now it's like you can get them in computing and things. You can have it with promotion, the promoter, like Donald Trump is a promoter, a bit of a con artist. With people, the improvisation tends to be around performance. And so even those ESFPs that are not formally in the arts, they still sort of like maybe like the office joker or do something. And somebody said something to Jeff that he thought was a big compliment when somebody said to him, Jeff, I never know what you're going to say next. And he thought that was brilliant because they want to be unpredictable. It goes with the artisan mindset of, for some reason, Jeff likes this very INTP sentence of the next action is a free variable. He liked that for artisans. And so Improvisation, expediency, that's the key thing of artisans. The problem with that is extremely short-term thinking. But in a crisis, in certain situations, when you got to get something done quickly, it's the best intellect. Say, strategy, your long-range thinking. At NTJs, you've got getting the sequence of steps right to achieve a long-term objective. So you've got TE with NI. You've got organization in terms of systems theory and processes and models, like even socionics and Model G, and coming up with a whole system. So systems and prototypes, all that structural logic stuff, that's organization of systems. That's the other half of the strategic intellect. And then you've got the diplomatic intellect, where you've got mentoring, which is a directive role, and you're doing it for their good. And so that correlates with the beta NFs, because you've got the vision, the NI, and the FE, and the value of SE to push people along, and leading a group. And Victor even calls ENFJ the mentor. And even socionics people would admit that IEI, you're seeing him, makes a good counselor. And then you've got the mediating roles. And again, that lines up. Does that line up within socionics, folks? It lines up with ethics of relations. And so reconciling people, mediating between people, sort of relationships between people done for FI reasons. And that's to do with the fact that they're informing. And when somebody has an informing interaction style, they want to be on the same level. Whereas when it's a mentor, you've got the mentor and then the person being mentored. You've got the teacher and you've got the class. You've got the counselor and the counselee. But generally the interaction style between the NFPs is getting people on the same level with that informing interaction style. And that's consistent with ethics of relations, in my opinion. And I'll add, in my personal opinion, is that ethics of relations is an aspect of FI, but not FI in its totality. So I see it as a sub-function of FI. Because I believe that ethics of relations also can be done by FE. So, for example, you two might interact with people based on, well, the emotions that you see, the body language that's all coming off them, and also social norms as well. So I would say, well, you're doing a relationship there via FE. And I suppose when you really get into a closer relationship, then it might be FI kind of connection, kind of how you feel in the moment, that sort of thing, like judging interpersonal distance. And so it becomes a blend. So am I talking nonsense, or does that make sense?
No, that makes sense. I feel like I like I guess like the socionics concept of the demonstrative function. Like my demonstrative being FI makes a lot of sense, because I feel like I can do that and I can do it well. But something about FE, like the SI-FE type, just works better for me. But I can also, I don't know, FI also works well.
Yeah. Vanderhoek would say that if you're in a state of introversion, which is, it's very similar to Model G, this idea of, I suppose, FI is always on unless you're extroverting. So it's like the SI with the FI is pretty much always on unless you're extroverting. And so that might help with the humanities and the arts, which a lot of it is SI and FI. Because you're going with the sensory details and the emotions of the person. So I can see that. Right, it's much easier and enjoyable for them to practice and thus to develop their logistical skills. While artisans have an eye for artistic variation, guardians care about being reliable, particularly in the maintenance and continuity of material. In other words, SJs are less interested in fitting things together in new ways than in holding things together as they are. Although new products and procedures might not be immoral or illegal, they must be viewed with a measure of suspicion, for they introduce change, and change for guardians is unsettling. Okay, I'll start with you, Jamie, on that one. Is change for you unsettling?
100%. Yeah. Yeah. Just probably in my personal life and my professional life, like professionally, it's like if you do something a certain way for years and then all of a sudden we're changing the system, it's very like it takes a long time for me to come around to it. You know.
Yeah. So any socionics people watching, guardians exist. Right. Over to you, Natalie.
Yeah, change is definitely very unsettling. I remember as a kid, one of my biggest fears was that my family would move. And then we did when I was 11, and that was very traumatic. And I remember for years after that, I would have like nightmares that we were moving again. And
Oh.
and then it happened again. But at that point, it was like it was an okay time, like timing wise. I wasn't like disrupting my school or anything like that. So it was less bad. And now I don't have nightmares about it at all. So I don't know if I just got desensitized to it, but yeah, like change in general is just, it's hard. It's really hard.
I could imagine though, if we dig a bit deeper on that. So say if you were more like ISFP, I could still imagine an ISFP or Shannon, who should be joining us, I can imagine though an ISFP saying the same thing but for maybe different reasons, that they dislike moving because they don't want to give up their friends.
Oh.
So I could imagine that.
I had just made friends at the school that I was at when we moved the first time. And it took me a long time to find friends there in the first place. So that was definitely a difficult aspect of it. But just like the whole feeling of it, the uprootedness and the not knowing what's going to happen, and I don't know.
There we go. They're not knowing what's going to happen.
I wonder if you're similar with this, Natalie, but the one thing about moving that I've hated, because I've had to do it several times, is always figuring out, like, where are the stores close to me? Where's the hospital? Where do I buy this? Where do I pay for my license plates? Like, all of that stuff not being figured out, ugh, bothers me.
Yeah, I remember in high school, I always really wanted to study abroad, but I had so much anxiety about it, and I had an INFJ friend who studied abroad for a semester and loved it, but she would tell me these stories like, oh, she got there and it was like midnight and then she couldn't like find somewhere to put all her luggage and she had to like cart it around until morning. She could go in her dorm, and it was just like, oh, I would hate that. Like I would hate all of the logistical mess of like trying to figure out what to do. And I find myself wondering about things that like at the beginning stages of the process you probably shouldn't even worry about, right? Like what restaurants would I eat at? Like,
right.
How are my neighbors going to be noisy? Am I not going to be able to sleep at night? Like, what?
I love to. Oh, sorry.
No,
I was going to say, I love too that you bring up studying abroad, because I did study abroad for a whole semester, but I went over there with a group of people. We were all going to be together, and I already knew some people, so I thought I would be safe. Yeah. If I would have went alone on a single individual program, I don't think I would have. It would have been too much, too fast.
Yeah. I went abroad for a week, so, and it was with a group like that. But I definitely have an easier time if I'm like with people and I'm like, you know, I can ask someone for help if I need something, or, you know, there's just a little more comfort in that. So I totally get that.
Yeah, especially if you don't know the language. I think that makes it even harder.
Yeah, I think it's really cool that you did that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
You too.
Well, thanks.
Jonathan, do you have something to say?
I was just going to say that I would hate going abroad by myself or anything like that as well, and I would also be thinking of all those different things. So obviously I'm an Enneagram guy, so some of that comes into it as well, because I'm a social one. So I suppose in a way I'm a bit more of an SG-ish INFJ, and I've got two SG parents, so it doesn't adds to it. But yeah, just that's my intro.
Right.
So it's not just an SJ. You don't have SFJs don't have a monopoly on worries like that.
Well, that's kind of comforting to know, actually. I wonder if it's like an IJ thing. Do you think? Because I feel like INTJs also have that thing where they like to plan in advance and know, at least from what I've observed.
Yeah. And that's something I'll talk about in future, that at a certain distance, ISFJ and INTJ can be quite similar in their concerns. It's just that when you get a little bit closer, I suppose they annoy each other more, where the TE comes out and annoys ISFJ, then the FE might annoy INTJ. But in terms of the things that they're interested in, there's some similarities. And interestingly enough, when you look at Model G and like the social mission block and the social adaptation block, those two types are in each other's social adaptation block. So it's interesting little complementarity there. But it's quite a hard thing to understand, and there's only a few people that get it, and it takes a while to explain, but I'll talk about that in future. Somebody's made an interesting point here, so I'll ask this person, what are your type preferences, Zaylin?
Are we going to wait? Ben, you're mute again. Ah. Right.
Gone again.
Yeah, we're back.
I loved your comment about IJs, though, Natalie. I think that's really key.
Thanks. Yeah, I've noticed that. And I tend to like INTJs a lot. Like, I'm not close to any, really. But I had an INTJ roommate in college and an INTJ professor, and I've known INTJs throughout the years, and I just really like them. I think they're really cool.
So, thanks for that, Jonathan. So, yeah, we've got, and she said there she was typed as ISFJ by Eric. That's talking with famous people, folks, I believe. So, is this relevant for, so what about this? Do you relate to this about?
One wants no close neighbors. I don't know. I didn't have the means to decide, I guess, the ideal for me. I don't know how to put that. Like, I just kind of had to take what I could get. So I wasn't really considering that. But maybe if I had more money.
There's a little bit of this is a little bit of digression, but I think it's interesting. In the pilot of Everybody Loves Raymond, they have a discussion about the benefits of having their parents live on the other side of the street. And their reasoning was that they didn't want to live so far away from them that they ended up visiting and then staying overnight. But what then happened was, because they lived so close, they kept coming round. So these kind of FE considerations.
That's a good point.
Well, in that show, though, the mother's an ESFJ, and that's kind of what brings them around.
Yeah, she's brilliant.
Yeah.
Jeff did not like the parents. I loved them.
I wonder why.
I'm pretty sure the dad was an ESTP, though.
Yes, yeah, but I just thought the quality of acting was brilliant. Apart from not Naomi Romano, but the Patricia Houghton, Peter Boyle, and the woman and the ESF one who played the grandmother, very good. Not the grandmother, the Raymond's mother. Was it Doris Roberts? Was it Doris Roberts? I can't remember her name.
No, I'll find out. She technically is a grandmother in the show as well.
Yes.
Let's see.
Oh yes, and Peter Boyle had quite a few heart attacks, and he died about 4 years after the series finished. And in the last few seasons, you notice how much less energy he's got, and his voice sounds quite frail. And he played Frankenstein's monster in Young Frankenstein, Peter Boyle. Is it Doris Roberts?
Yes, it is Doris Roberts.
Right. There we go. So you can see here that Keirsey's view of artisans, so you might think, leans towards creative subtype if you look at it in a socionics lens, well, humanitarian socionics lens. The classical socionics might not allow BCNH because, you know, it goes against their rigid structure. Although new practices have probably done that, not immoral or illegal, you still don't like them. The SJ knows as well as others that change is inevitable, necessary, and even on occasion desirable. But it should be resisted when it is at the expense of old standby products and time-tested ways of the institutions that have served us well. Better that change occurs through slow evolution than by sudden revolution. Do you agree with that?
I would, I think. I think naturally you kind of grow too as a person, and if you're forced into something quickly, it can be very disorienting.
Right. I'd agree with that too.
Right. So, folks, this is not just the Keirsey stereotype, because some people have said that the Keirsey profiles for Guardians are all old-fashioned.
I feel like... no, I was just going to interject an opinion. I feel like the people who say that devalue sort of like, or at least I feel like it's almost devaluing what Guardians offer. Like, we offer that stability and, things that are necessary, but I guess people think it's a stereotype because it's not glamorous or exciting. I don't know.
I think there's also just like, if you're a Guardian, you'll be shaped a lot by your environment. I mean, everyone is, but Guardians especially. So I remember years ago when I was just getting into type, I saw someone who said they were an ESTJ and that they were an anarchist, but it made sense because their parents were also anarchists. So that's so there's like stability there.
An example of upbringing, an interesting example, or rather exemplar of a Guardian is Julia O. Very careful not to mention her surname. Neuroscience, but it's like her father was I think a computing professor. So part of her upbringing, sort of what is normal for her as a Guardian, is slightly different. But she actually went into neuroscience, neurodegenerative disorders, but in order to help people. So you still got that kind of like SFJ thing of helping people on a practical level. And again, it's SI related, especially. And Keirsey he literally wrote, most physicians are Guardians. And he says that very common that a physician to be have ISFJ preferences rather. Right, this is interesting about Harry Truman. Do you think that Harry Truman? I'll read it out, then ask Jonathan if he thinks he's a Guardian. When Harry Truman became president, for example, he had no intention of following the artisan Franklin Delano Roosevelt's footsteps. Truman quickly stepped back from many of FDR's quick-fix, budget-busting New Deal social programs and proposed a more fiscally responsible plan he called the Fair Deal. I want to keep my feet on the ground, Truman said. I don't want any experiments. The American people have been through a lot of experiments, and they want to rest from experiments. Truman was clearly no ordinary Guardian, but the talents he showed as president, as well as his earlier jobs as mail clerk, railroad timekeeper, and storekeeper, show clearly the Guardian's abiding interest in working with materiel, both in administering, conserving, regulating, and supporting.
Yeah, I don't know much about Truman, but from what I've heard, that makes sense for him to be. I know that Enneagram he's been typed by some people as a phobic 6, which is consistent with that.
Yep. I'll just say one thing about Julia. She was unusual in not having a 6 in her tri-type. Most Guardians do. Right, interest, practice, skill. I'll go for this quite quickly because skills are acquired by practice. No practice, no skill. Much practice, much skill. Any skill will wither on the vine and gradually fade away in the degree that it is starved of practice, and the same skill will increase precisely in the degree that it is given exercise in practice. The neural cell is no different from the muscle cell in this. Use it or lose it is nature's inviolable law. In addition, there is a feedback relation between interest and ability. We improve in doing things we're interested in doing and have greater interest in the things we do well. Interest reinforces skill, skill reinforces interest. Oh, I'll mention something that Dario has shown in his research. I'll finish this paragraph, then I'll get to what Dario has shown about how different SJ's brains can be. And they show the most variation of the types.
I was going to say that what you just read, Dario has proven with his research too, that if you're interested, you'll do better because you'll try harder. Yeah.
Interest reinforces skill, skill reinforces interest, and neither seems to be the starting point. So the Guardian's lifelong interest in logistical action fuels their daily exercise of logistical skills, and as logistical skills increase, then so does interest in it, precisely and exclusively measured by the amount of practice. So what Dario showed was, because Guardians like to stick to what they know and do the same thing, it really leaves the mark in the brain. And so when Dario looked at older SJs, people with SJ preferences rather, he really saw the influence of their career on their brains. And so he saw a lot of variance amongst the Guardians. And I think he said that a lot of the ENFPs looked similar to each other in their brain activity. Do you think that's true? I'll ask both of you. I'll ask Jamie first. Do you think that's true that you like to stick to something and get good at it?
I mean, I've had a lot of jobs and stuff, but one thing my husband's even told me is like, you need to find a different hobby that isn't writing. That's all you do is write. And so I feel like in some way maybe that would show up if I ever, I don't know. Got a scan.
Is that the same for you, Natalie? Do you like stick to one thing, or that?
Actually, that's interesting because I also like to write, and that was the thing that I was always drawn to the most when I was in school, even in like elementary school. And I remember all throughout like high school and college, just really like pouring everything that I had into that. And took a break from college for a year and then came back, and suddenly my writing was just like, it was so easy, and it was like everything I wrote was good. And I remember just like struggling before that, and it wasn't that I didn't write well, it was just maybe I reached a point where like my brain just needed a break to focus on something else, and then I came back to it and it was like, but yeah, I've always really liked writing, and I tend to hyper focus on like a few things. So MBTI is like, and typology is like another one of my long running obsessions. But I don't have that many other hobbies, I guess, that I pursue to the same degree. Yeah.
I've got a video. I can ask a request of the people in the chat. If you go and find my video on the relationship between Jungian type, between writers and type, you could post that in the video chat for other people to click on later on. And so we did that. It was about a 4-hour event. It was a few years ago. It was something like how the writer's type influences their work. I think it was like that. Now, we did one on the Enneagram instincts and writing. I made it private because I talked about something I was writing in it, and I thought afterwards I shouldn't have talked about that. So once I've edited that out, then I'll make the 3 events public, and did those with Jonathan, I think sometime either last year or the year before. The influence of instinctual stacking on writing style.
It was last year because it was taking, I thought about it ages ago, but when we did it last year, remember that?
Yeah. Right then. Now, in a sense, every individual has not 1 but 4 IQs, and it is virtually impossible for one person to develop all 4 of his or her capabilities equally. So this is Keirsey's equivalent of the functions, his intellects, of his capabilities equally. The kind of person practiced, the kind of operation practiced most develops most, while that practiced least develops least. Nothing presenting. Thanks for the super chat, Hostak. The kind of operation practice most develops most, while that practice least develops least. Nothing. I remember with Peter Schiff, someone donated $100. They did $100 super chat, and he said, "Oh, $100. I better give $100 answer." But the thing is, though, don't give those $100 super chats to Peter Schiff. He's already a millionaire. He has $150 million. Give them to me. Right. Thank you, Fate. I can't see it at the moment. But perhaps there's a little rule in there that stops it by default. Okay, kind of operation, practice most, develops most, while that practice least develops least. Nothing preventing guardians instinctively practice logistical operations, far more and far earlier than tactical, diplomatic, and particularly strategic operations, and therefore end up with logistical intelligence outstripping the others by a wide margin. In other words, while SJs practice logistics early in life, they don't go around to exercising their sense of strategy until it becomes necessary to do so, or if ever. However, he did write in Personology that, I think his quote was, it has to be a very bright guardian indeed that can outdo the average rational. But the way Keirsey writes about rationals, he makes them all look like geniuses anyway. So the average rational for Keirsey is probably still really smart. So, and like I said, I gave the example of Julia, where she's doing that something you associate with NTs, but really science is ST. And she's, because it's all like empirical, mostly empirical where she is, because she's on the biochemical side, but she's doing it for SF reasons. And she gets frustrated by, and she said that she gets frustrated by the fact that it takes about 10 years, that it would take about 10 years for her research to end up benefiting people down the road. So like I said, until it becomes necessary, so you can see something can do something atypical. So it's atypical of ESFJ to be neuroscientist, but they can do it for typical reasons. It's like you can have it or done in a typical way. A better example would be an ISTJ artist is atypical, but they would do it in a typical way, like by the book and traditional and classical painting methods. That's and I didn't just come out that out of thin air. Imogen told me about that. She was an artist, and her brother's an artist, and her brother's ISTJ, in her opinion. All right. Of course, circumstances can sometimes move guardians to engage in those activities that are not so natural to them. And with lots of practice, especially as children, they can develop the other abilities, becoming quite the diplomats with other people, learning to spot immediate tactical advantage, and even showing a good deal of skill in their short suit of long-range strategic planning, such as shown by General Omar Bradley in World War II. Jonathan, do you know about General Omar Bradley?
Never heard of him.
Okay. Right. Note that in the graph below, the Guardians tend to do better at logistics than at diplomacy and tactics, and that their strategic capabilities lag far behind. Logistics comes easy, strategy not so. But he just said that with enough effort, they can, and circumstances. All right. So, and then at last for logistics. Now, it's certainly true of INTP that they're low on logistics. Different kind of logistics for ENTJ. I suppose ENTJ is bad at logistics in terms of all the fine details and things. Certainly the SFJ kind of stuff, ENTJs are not great at, like problems with SI break and internal body and taking care of themselves and having too much stress. Not so good at taking care of themselves, I suppose, would be an example of them being weak at SFJ stuff. Something else to note is that the Guardian IQ profile is the exact opposite of the NT rational profile, where the SJ suit is long, the NT is short, and where the SJ is short, the NT is long. All the same, both can be nearly equal in their tactical and diplomatic abilities, because SJs share cooperative implementation with diplomatic NFs and concrete communication with tactical SPs, just as NTs share abstract communication with NFs and utilitarian implementation with SPs. Thus, both SJs and NTs tend to develop their tactical and diplomatic intelligence from time to time as nearly equal second and third suits, but even though they are diametric opposites in how they use tools and words, they are not likely to outdo one another in these two middle kinds of intellectual development. Right. I don't know if you got any thoughts on that. It was all a lot of TI from Keirsey.
I was surprised that NTs would have higher diplomacy, I guess.
Yeah, I've asked about that, and I mentioned that, but then Amanda said her foster mother is INTJ. And it's and she sort of does it in a way where I think she said that, and she said this publicly in the, because we did a hangout on the strategic intellect, and I brought that up where, but what about INTJ? They're supposed to be FE break, and then she said, well, her foster mother, she's done it for decades, and she's like won awards, and her method with children was sort of like tough love and really getting them to develop themselves. So that's an example of atypical, but in a typical way. Right, you can see that being in an INTJ kind of way. But if you think of INTJ as it's maybe a presidential advisor, maybe Karl Rove or that Hungarian guy. I forgot his name. What was his name? Jonathan.
Kissinger?
Yes, Kissinger. Do you think he was INTJ?
I think he's INTP, but you keep saying INTJ. But
I don't know. It's just sort of like, I'm not quite sure, but that would be an example of maybe an NT in that kind of role. I
don't think they're both NTs, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. And I suppose you can get NT counsellors.
It'd be intense, yeah.
I think I had an INTJ counselor once. I don't remember too much about that experience, but I had this thought while reading it, the descriptions, that strategy and diplomacy almost seem more abstract than like tactics and logistics.
Yes, that's the point. Yes.
Yeah, but like diplomacy also has that human element, so I could see like SJs, especially SFJs, also having ability there.
Yeah, and when he says diplomacy, he means it in the way of like mentoring, directive role, or mediating, informing role. And so he has ENFP predisposed to the role of the champion of a cause, the advocator, and INFP predisposed to the role of reconciler, which might be good in, say, marriage counseling or family therapy. And from a function point of view, you can see INFP as, oh, well, this point of view and that point of view, and you've got a point, and it's like seeing all the different points of view and integrating them together, which goes with Linda Berens behind the scenes. I think you selected that behind the scenes, integrating different inputs. Mm-hmm. And I think she had, in her book, she wrote that ISFJ like balances the needs of other people. Like, so she had them as an integrator on that level, I think. And she had ISFP as balancing different aspects in a artistic composition. And for INTP, it's like me, different inputs, a bit of Keirsey here, a bit of Enneagram, a bit of socionics, and integrate them into what some people might think of as a mishmash. Logistical role variants. While all the Guardians have logistical intelligence in common, they differ amongst themselves a great deal in the kinds of logistical roles they are inclined to practice. Broadly speaking, Guardians are interested in taking up the role of what I call the administrator or the conservator. Now, he changed administrator to monitor in personality, and he changed, anyway, you don't want to know what he changed to, just stick with these ones, to administrator for the STJs and the conservator. And these differentiate into 4 logistical role variants: the supervisor, ESTJ, the inspector, ISTJ, the provider, ESFJ, and the protector, ISFJ. All Guardians through and through, but quite distinct in their guardianship. Consider the following chart, which shows the Guardians' logistical roles and role variants opposite their most often practiced intelligent operations. So I would like to remind people here that Keirsey has the type and the role variant. And the role variant is only what is any type can play. Any role variant is just that Keirsey believes that in this example, ISFJ, what he later called logistical accommodator, plays the role of the protector best. And he thinks ENTJ, that's strategic initiator, because they've got the strategic intellect and are expressive and are directive, are naturally inclined and do well in the role of a mobilizer of resources, which requires a directive attitude and an expressive extroverted attitude. So there's the difference between role variant, which is like looking at the job, the kind of job they're good at, versus the type. And so I think people get confused with that when people say that Keirsey is writing about stereotypes, when they're confusing the type with the role variant. And but I watched Binyamin's interview with Dario recently, and he reiterated that someone's career very much affects their brain, just as much as type. And so playing the role will affect the person. And so Dario gave the example of, yeah, that was it. He said that there was a woman who didn't know with ENTP preferences, but when he EEG'd her, she had a lot of activity around hearing, and that her mother was ESFP and a counselor, and that she was a counselor as well. And so because of her job, she had a lot of activity that you would associate with a different type and not with ENTP. You would associate with ESFP because I've got a lot of what, because ESFPs are good listeners, apparently, according to Dario. So you can see it, enforcing. That's your demonstrative force sensorics in socionics. Enforcing the rules. There you go. TE and SE. Supervisor. And again, that's their natural predisposition because their interaction style is in charge. So it's easier for them to enforce the rules when they're naturally in charge anyway, because they are a logistical initiator. And then we've got here, if someone's a logistical contender, so reserved but also directive, then they're inclined to certify them. You've not done this quite right. You should do it like this. So it's like a one-up. You've got the person, it's one up, one down. You've got the inspector and the person being inspected. And then you've got ESFJ, logistical collaborator, wants to involve people at the same level. And so they're going to be, and so you can think in function terms. If you've got extroverted feeling and comfort sensing, you're going to be directed towards the needs, the practical care needs of other people, and usually a group of people, and so supplying people with the necessities of life. So you can see a functional reason for the predisposition towards that role. Now, with protector, you've got, that lines up with, what does that line up with, folks? That lines up with SI minus, minimizing bodily discomfort. So ISFJs, logistical accommodators, are predisposed to those roles. Again, around safety, securing, nurse, doctor, those kind of conserving roles. Any comments on that whilst I rest my voice?
I don't think so on my end.
I don't think I have any comments either.
Okay. Okay. Oh, now this is about logistical administrators. So this is the intellect that STJs, the tough-minded guardians, are inclined towards, because it requires you to, be directive and not necessarily nice. So what I'm thinking is ISFJ can do ESTJ stuff, but it takes a lot of energy for them to sort of they physically know, they know intellectually how to supervise somebody in terms of what they should do, but actually getting in there and telling them you're not doing it right and you should do it like this is a bit of a strain, I imagine. So intellectually you can do it, but on an emotional level, tricky, I suppose.
Yeah, it might have to do too with being behind the scenes. I've helped teach courses at colleges, and it's always nerve-wracking to be the person people look to tell us what to do. It's pretty scary. I can do it, but it's not comfortable at all.
Right.
Yeah, I was a writing tutor in college for a year, and that I've always found it tricky to balance how to give feedback that's truthful without like hurting the person's feelings, because I'm very concerned with like, you know, how I'm saying something. And so sometimes I almost felt like I didn't really help people at all because I didn't know
Right.
how to like give that feedback.
Put a bunch of smiley faces on the paper. Like, this is great.
Yeah, yeah, you're doing awesome.
So I'll just say to the audience, in general, there are 4 exceptions, but in general, thinking types tend to be directive, except for NTPs, and feeling types tend to be informing, except for NFJs. But for NFJs, they're mentoring people, directing people for their own good, because like the counselor role, the teacher role, but usually it's those things that they don't want to be directive because it's not as nice. You have to, like, you know, try and get some direct people. Literally is more of a hard-headed inclination. It's harder. So tough-minded guardians are particularly interested in the role of administrator. That is, they're given to regulating those procedures and products in their charge in the light of a standard of performance. These administrators are the directive guardians, which means that their first instinct is to take charge and tell us others what to do. So you can see here that Linda Behrens extracted the interaction styles from Keirsey's work and developed it from there. And she gives credit to Keirsey for having these for the origin of the interaction styles. Once I've gone through the supervisor, I'll ask you about your husband, Jamie, and see if he's like this. Yeah. So several terms may be used to depict the administrator's function: captain, commander, conductor, director, executive, governor, superintendent, all bossy roles. Administrators, so STJs are good at being administrators, and Victor even calls folks the LSE, the ENTJ, in humanitarian socionics, the administrator. Administrators run a type ship in 2 basic ways, but it's probably the one that's like this one is probably normalizing. Administrators run a type ship in 2 basic ways, by acting either as the expressive supervisor or the reserved inspector. Supervisors enforce standard operating procedures, keeping one eye on their people's performance and the other on the rules and regulations that govern their activities, making sure that they behave in keeping with agreed upon procedures and standards of conduct, or else face the agreed upon consequences. These expressive supervisors let you know how you're doing. Their business is to mind others' business. Overseeing what they do, surveilling the premises, controlling work areas, directing operations, refereeing disputes, all to ensure compliance with the rules and regulations. Over to you, Jamie. Is that like your husband?
Yeah. Like, even in the home, like, things need to be a certain way, kind of thing. For sure. It's funny, though, because I sent him all the different temperaments, and he knew he was, is it the take charge or directive type or whatever? Like, he read it and picked it out and didn't even know. Like, he's not interested in type, but he's an ESTJ. Oh, you're muted. Whoops.
Jamie, I think it's really funny that in socionics, ESTJ is the supervisor of SEI, LSE, and SEI. And they're called the supervisor.
For real, yeah. Actually, it transfers, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Hang on a minute. What was that? I'll just come back. So what transfers?
Oh, I was just saying that I thought it was funny that in socionics, LSE is the supervisor of SEI, and they're called the supervisors here. So yeah, they're actually our supervisors.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah. What was I can't remember. Oh yes. So initially, Linda Behrens called them take charge, but she actually got a bit of pushback from when she actually showed it to businesses. And so she changed it from take charge to in charge. And also when she first taught Temperament, she used Keirsey's names like artisan, guardian, idealist, and rational. And then she said that Carol said that based on feedback from organizations, that people were happier with improviser, stabilizer, theorist, and catalyst for the names of the temperaments. So that sort of explains why she changed them. So that's very understandable that you said take charge, because that was her first choice for that style.
Well, I mean, my husband too, he gets into the situations where there's supposedly a leader at work he has to follow, and they freeze, and he does take charge. Like, he can't handle it when people don't know what they need to do.
Yeah. There we go. Keirsey for the win. Right.
Yes.
So, and then again, you can make some correlations with then creative force. Creative sensor in TESX, power sensor. So yeah, inspectors. In contrast, so ISTJ is so LSI normalizing would probably go towards this role, and Victor even calls LSI the inspector. So inspectors, in contrast, often work behind the scenes, taking a close look at products and accounts, putting the farmers' crops, the manufacturers' goods, the company's books, the importers' shipments, and so on under a magnifying glass, so that each and every unit is properly inventoried and certified, with no deviation from the legal standard left undetected. There are several ways of speaking of the inspector's seclusive role: appraiser, assessor, auditor, checker, examiner, evaluator, judge, measurer, surveyor, tester, and weigher, all keeping watchful eye out for irregularities. So I think maybe you two have done quite a bit of this in your careers. So I'll go to Jamie first, then Natalie. Have you done this kind of, I think you've done sort of this kind of stuff.
Somewhat, yeah. I would say in terms of like editing or trying to, like, working in museums, you know, you're trying to upkeep basically your materials, checking for any damage, and you have to be very aware of like loans you get from other institutions, make sure that nothing's changed, basically. I don't know.
How about you, Natalie?
Yeah, for sure with editing, and then like working in a library, making sure that books are shelved properly and sort of organizing things. And actually, I enjoy doing some of that. My dad is actually an ISTJ, and he keeps track of finances for his group at work. So he's an engineer by trade, but that's what he does right now. And it's funny, like in the home too, I see a little bit of that, like almost ESTJ tendencies to supervise, but it's like he has a nicer way of doing it, at least from what I've read of ESTJs. He'll always ask, like, because he wants, you know, like the counters clean or whatever. So he'll be like, "Is this your cup? Like, is this your thing? Is this your?" And it's like this. It's like his catchphrase. I feel like.
Yeah, that shows you that there's something that SI is tricky to define. It's got all these different angles on it. Like, that is like the socionics SI, but then as Jamie wrote in her article, there is that sort of like idiosyncratic emotional memory aspect to SI. So it's got all these different angles on it. So then now we're on to those. So would you prefer to do one-to-one roles with people rather than it might be better once I've gone over the protector role, we'll see which one you're more naturally inclined to do. So I'm getting ahead of myself. So this is Logistical Conservators. So the friendly guardians are prone to choose the part of the conservator, that person whose job it is to support institutions by ensuring the supply and security of those persons and properties they are responsible for. In their support role, conservators tend to be more informative than directive, giving information, reports, accounts, records, and so on first, and given orders only as a last resort. As in the case of, I think I took that out, but it's actually okay. That's okay. As in the case of the administrator, so those words went over. As in the case of administrator, there are many words that define the conservator's function: amass, bank, budget, collect, deposit, garner, gather, hold, husband, keep, reserve, save, stock, store, and warehouse. So, Jamie, are you happier with that rather than, say, inspecting someone's work?
That's actually really hard for me.
Yeah.
To decide which I prefer.
Yeah.
I feel like I like you had talked about, working one-on-one with people.
Yeah.
But it's like people that I get comfortable with, not like strangers, you
Yeah.
know? So that's why I liked working at an archive, where I could kind of do the inspections and stuff, but also have that kind of collective atmosphere of we're all working together to reach some end. Like, I really like that.
What about you, Natalie?
I related to what you just read from that description, which was being more informative than directive.
Yeah.
Just generally, I feel like that's even how I talk sometimes, and or well, all the time. And I won't realize that I'm not being as direct as I think I am when I'm saying things. I'm just presenting this information. But yeah, with like one-on-one, I feel like I definitely enjoy working more with people than like primarily with objects, or like making sure things are all in line. Like, I really like my work at the library because I get to interact with, I mean, it can be draining to interact with like a wide variety of people, but it's also interesting, and I really enjoy that feeling of like helping someone in a direct way. But doing things that are like sort of standard procedure, like finding books or looking up something online, or showing someone how to use one of our audiobook apps or whatever. Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to be accused of sweeping stuff under the rug when there is an irregularity. So you've got somebody here who doesn't have, and she identifies as ISFJ. So she might be somebody who's not normalizing subtype in socionics. So, Zaylin, if you want to give a few more details on that, about, say, your approach towards procedure and routine and whether you like it or not, then I can put that on screen later on. Right. Oh, yeah. So we've got, so the providers. So ESFJ is most inclined to this role because it requires quite a few people. It's quite expressive. It's actually some very interesting things in this description. It helps you see more. For me, it helps me to see more male ESFJs, this kind of thing. I think Charles Payne on Fox Business might be a male ESFJ. Providers work to furnish others with the necessities of life, to serve others, to see to their welfare, to make sure that they feel well provisioned and part of the group. This outgoing public role can be acted out in the form of, this is interesting, how many people thought this? Banker, benefactor, caterer, equipper, distributor, financier, furnisher, host or hostess, outfitter, patron, sponsor, subsidizer, and in general, supplier of someone in need with whatever is needed. So you can see like a huge, like a range of intellect there. Of like how many people associate financier or banker with ESFJ? Not many.
Yeah, when you read that, I was like, oh, that sounds so tiring to have to be so high level energy all the time. So much.
Interestingly, Kretschmer, one of the translations of Kretschmer's terms, he described a type as jolly organizer, and I thought he's got to be describing ESFJ.
Makes sense.
Right. So you can see here, though, I mean, you can imagine, say, an ESFJ running a corner shop and just like being really interested in customer service and doing it for sort of like FE reasons on a practical level, and like getting of a great relationship with his or her customers. And so I can imagine that. Yeah. It's just it's like with Julia, where I said like doing something atypical but for a typical reason, where you might have ESFJ in one of these roles where they want to help people start a business, it's like for the community and maybe things like that, and to help provide employment, these kind of things. So I can imagine people doing that for FE reasons. And so when I read that, I thought it was very interesting. And it helps me to see ESFJs in sort of atypical roles. It sort of makes sense that in the past that you might have male ESFJs would sort of go into these roles because it might be harder for them to do more of the more maternal kind of attentive roles, that they might have gone into these kind of roles here that might be more typically associated with business. Because I do also think that obviously TE types can do these same jobs: financier, banker, patron, sponsor. So this is a little bit determined by Keirsey's deductive thinking of providing resources. So here we go, protectors. Protectors, in contrast, take on the task of shielding others from the dirt and dangers of the world. Right, we can do this line by line. Is that true of you, Jamie? Shielding others from the dirt and dangers of the world.
I mean, I think I try to help people avoid disaster. So if they're they don't see a potential, like, I don't know, fallout, I'll do what I can to help that.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know. I sort of enjoy creating, like, at least in my work at the library, like an atmosphere where people are comfortable, and sort of contributing to like the maintenance of that. Like we often have competing interests. So for example, a group of rowdy teenagers who are being loud, and they have their space to be loud in, but then you have to balance that with other people's needs where people want it to be quiet. And so like just keeping a balance on like protecting everybody's interests, I guess. I don't know if that relates, but
yeah, sounds so FE too. Like you're so aware of multiple people's needs. Like how do you meet them all?
And that can be very stressful for me. I almost feel like that's more of an ESFJ type strength to like, I don't know, do that, but I can do it too. It's just
yeah.
So it's like intellectually it's not a strain, but it's a strain in terms of interaction style.
In terms of like energy level too. I know, like, I always wanted to be the person, like when I was in high school, I ran cross country, and I always enjoyed being the person that had like the things everyone needed. Like if someone needed a painkiller, then I had one. If someone needed an extra pair of socks, like I have one. So that kind of thing is like, I don't know. I guess it sort of comes naturally to me, and it's makes me feel special or something.
I wonder if this you'll connect with too. Like we had this work meeting when I was working at this gym, and I knew it was going to be very long and that I would eventually get hungry. And so I was like, well, the people around me that are there with me are probably going to get hungry too. So I'm going to buy a big bag of nuts, some almonds. And so when I opened it up too, people were like, oh my God, I'm hungry. Can I have some? I'm like, yes, like I totally prepared for this. So you guys are all taken care of.
Yeah.
There you go. There's your FE with your SI. So you can understand it in function terms. Natalie, are you like a 9 in Enneagram?
I wish I was a 9. I'm a 6. Those are the descriptions I read, and I'm like, oof, I don't like this, but this is how I am. And I relate to a lot of 9 too. I probably have 9 in my tri-type somewhere, but I don't really know what my tri-type is. I think I come off like a 9 in many ways, but I'm a self-preservation 6.
That was the thing is, when I saw that, so I got the NE here, but when I saw I even carry baby wipes, but my mind, this is why I shouldn't speed read and why I don't speed read, but my mind saw I even cry baby wipes.
What?
As if, It's just the way my okay. I think I'm looking for the absurd because it's entertaining. So there's a bit more here. This seclusive private role also has many forms: attendant, custodian, caretaker, insurer, fortifier, ombudsman, preserver, shelterer, shepherd, steward, underwriter, warder, and in general, anyone who sees to the physical safety and security of those in need of care. So, do you think that you naturally predisposed to that role, Jamie?
I would say so. I mean, if there's any kind of, like, I worked in early childhood for a long time, and that was for sure, like, let's prevent all of these disasters for these kids that are trying to bite each other and punch each other and, you know, fall down and all of these things. But yeah, it just plays out every day, I guess, too.
Natalie?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The question is, do you relate to that stuff here?
Yeah, I guess. I'm trying to think of like examples, but
Okay, well, if you got one, go on. Did you just think of one?
No, that's okay.
Okay, we're going to always come back to it. So comparing logistical role variants. So we've not got much left now. We've got this and then the next page. Every guardian plays these 4 roles well, but no guardian plays them equally well. Indeed, what distinguishes guardians from one another is the structure of their intellect, that is, their profile of logistical roles. Some administrators are better as supervisors of personnel and procedures, and others as inspectors of products and accounts. I just want to get this digression in. So, as you can see here, Keirsey's view of the intellect is about how well you can produce, how well you can enact an intelligent role. Interestingly enough, Victor's view of functions, Mitchell came up with the term behavioral units, how Victor sees functions, and this will give you an idea of, this is how Victor defines the strength of the function. The concept characterizing the ability of a function to respond adequately and effectively to the task that has arisen, that is to solve it. So Victor's socionics is also trying to get more empirical in terms of, this is what the function does in the real world, this is how it's observable. And so in so model A would have my type, LII, as strong TE. Model G says, and Victor says, no, not really. Not good in terms of like that, enacting it, solving problems to do with TE. No, not really. High information, but low energy for it. And when it comes to practicality, and then if you've not got the energy for it, then you don't do it and you don't solve the problem. And then from the outside, it's like, you're not that good at TE. It's not that you then can't say, yeah, but inside I'm brilliant. In terms of the actual real world application of the function as a behavioral unit and as a kind of intelligence. So you can see how Victor has moved from original socionics, from information metabolism to behavioral units described on these 4 pips levels, because that's in his effort to be more empirical, yet still consistent with information socionics. So that's what I was just saying here about the structure of the intellect and Keirsey looking at intelligent actions. Oh, and one of the reasons why Keirsey looked at it like this is that he said that Carl Jung's point was to, with the psychological types, was to find out what people had in mind. And then reading some forwards to psychological type, Carl Jung was about, this is just a way to organize the information. And that helps you diagnose the issues of the client around, especially around what the inferior function is. And Marie-Louise von Franz wrote a whole book on the inferior function and problems around it. So with you, Natalie, when you mentioned things like, oh, I'm afraid of this happening, but I'm also want to do this thing. And you've got like a tug of war, it seems, within you between, wanted to take an opportunity and explore versus safety concerns. And so that might be an issue for you to explore the sort of relationship there. But you seem pretty much aware of it. But I could imagine somebody else maybe having a problem in that area if they were less conscious of their inferior NE.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely still a problem. Like, I struggle with it. So, yeah.
And another example I can give is, in my opinion, those that resemble INFJ can have problems around extroverted sensing in terms of being attracted to its dark side, in terms of other people and like various mixed feelings of it, and so it can get it dark in terms of what the track. Go on, Jonathan. Contradict me.
Why is that a problem?
Well, because they can have terrible tasting partners.
In your opinion?
In my opinion.
What do you mean?
Well, one of them said to me...
Bad boys and bad girls.
Yes.
ESTPs.
Yeah. One of them said to me that... I asked someone about this and she said, I think it's objectively true that INFJs have bad taste. Female INFJs have bad taste in men. So part of it is the qualities that they're attracted to, and that kind of person can be very dynamic and heroic and be that sort of like super ESTP, well-developed person. But that tends to be when they're older, and because INFJ does go towards that directive role, I think part of them sees the potential in them. They see them as the rough diamond that they can shape into like the finished article. I think there is part of that within the makeup of INFJ to find that ESTP rough diamond. Right, that's just my biased opinion there.
Yeah, SE polar. I don't know about that one.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing. But here we go. Indeed, what distinguishes guardians from one another is the structure of their intellect. That is the profile of logistical roles, which we can say correlates to functions, especially when it's SI with TE. You've got the directive roles, the administrative roles, and when it's SI with FE, it's providing stuff for other people, so it lines up with the functions. That's what Behrens did, integrate functions with temperament. It also lines up with blocking to a certain extent. Some administrators are better as supervisors of personnel and procedures, others as inspectors of products and accounts, even though supervising and inspecting are two sides of the same coin, with supervisors often inspecting their people and inspectors often supervising operations. Similarly, some conservators are better as providers of goods and services and others as protectors against loss and injury. Even though providers must often protect their suppliers and protectors must often provide protection. To help visualize the differences among guardians in their likely development of logistical skills, consider the following chart. Right, just gonna go through. I'm going to show something afterwards about the relationship between ENFJ and ESTJ in terms of the way their roles overlap. Note that supervisors, right, you can see there, so it's like weakest at supervising, best at protecting, goes towards, because this is reserved and informing, this is extroverted and directive, requires a lot of energy, and note that, and goes against the FE a bit. Note that supervisors, ESTJs, are the mirror image of protectors, as are providers of inspectors. Thus, the supervisors are usually eager to see to it that people do what they are supposed to, or else be called to task, while they are less inclined to safeguard the people they supervise. How heartless of them. The reverse holds for the protectors, who leave nothing to chance in ensuring the safety of their charges, while they find it more difficult to let them know when to step out of line. I've probably written something there about functions. Yeah. SIFX is SE control, so SE ignoring, whereas TESX is SE creative. So you can see that they're more likely to enforce things. Yeah, do you find it difficult to let people know when they've stepped out of line?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
My
That's
husband
probably-
oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, you're good.
Oh no, I was just gonna say my husband tells me I suck at discipline. So yeah. What
Probably
were you gonna say,
yeah.
Natalie?
Oh, just like, especially if I have a conflict with someone at work, like I've gone to my supervisor to sort of ask her how to navigate that before. Because I don't like, yeah, I don't like conflict in that way, especially if I have to be the one to tell someone else. Like, I'm generally pretty good at taking criticism, but I'm not very good at giving it.
Yeah.
So
you can imagine an ESTJ librarian would be really good at the shushes and really enforce the quietness.
oh yeah, yeah.
Oh
Yeah, I call them over. We play like good cop, bad cop, you know.
yes.
Just so the providers are the most skilled in supplying their people with what they need to fare well, though not as skilled in taking care to inspect their products. And last, the inspectors are quite willing and able to check up on the quality and quantity of the work done by their charges, but less so to provide for the wants and needs of those whose products they inspect. All the same, though, each of the guardians is less skilled in some logistical roles than in others. Wait a minute. All the same, though each of the guardians is less skilled in some logistical roles than in others, they still practice their short suit more and therefore develop it more than of the tactical, diplomatic, and strategic roles of the other types. And then to go on to the poor traits. So the one thing I wanted to show was the thing about ESTJ enforcing the rules. I wanted to show how there's an overlap with a certain type. Yeah, that was it. If I go to, is it the explanation? Yeah, it's the explanation. That's not right. That's it. There. No, not there. There. Is it Lex's? No, it's Rex's. Right, extroverts. This one. I'm going to try and open it. Oh, where did it go? I thought I created a profile of it. Oh, copy and debate folder. That should be right. Wait a minute. Slides.
Do you need some help organizing your files there, Ben?
Yes, I might do. But I'll show this on screen while I try and find it. But what I'm trying to show here is there's two complementary roles, and that is between ESTJ supervisor and teacher. And so what I'm thinking is, if you're supervising somebody and you find out they don't know what to do, well, you got to switch role to teacher. What do you think you're doing? You don't do it like that. You do it like this. And then you change to the teacher mode. And then there might be some circumstances where teachers have to enforce discipline and the rules within the classroom. So I see how those two roles are complementary. Teacher and supervisor. Do you agree? Are those roles complementary?
I do, yeah. I've seen my husband do it too. And I've had ESTJs get very frustrated with me in general and have to sit there and take me step by step through things.
Right. Now, here, yeah, go on. I'm just... Do you think that's true as well, Natalie? The sort of like the roles that supervisors frequently have to teach, teachers frequently have to supervise, yeah.
I feel like I can see that. My dad is an ISTJ, and it's so a little bit different dynamic than with ESTJ, but he's definitely, he was the one to teach me all of my math stuff that I didn't understand for school over the years, and just teaching me how to do practical things.
Right, so the interesting thing here is that there is something in Model G called the social adaptation shift. And part of this is, so we've got here, you've got social mission. So this is for ENFJ. I've not done ESTJ yet. So, and this is what Andre helped me a lot with by giving me a new translation. So mission, to contribute to the Socion, showing their specialization. So this is quite similar to the role and a predisposed role, like the social role, the social mission. Like Keirsey was looking at a similar thing. Now, the reason why I was able to see this similarity was because of Keirsey. Because he called the type, and look, you know, I said before about ESTJ and ENFJ. Well, look which type's here. ESTJ, social adaptation. Yeah, and this is a discovery I made, and I'm trying to talk about it to people, and they don't seem to get it that quickly, or they don't appreciate how amazing I think it is, or maybe I think it's really interesting because it validates the benefit ring in socionics. So the idea here being, functions of this block provide stability to a person operating in society. Without these functions, it is impossible to operate normally in society if the social mission is not performed for any reason. So what we can say is, if you've got an ENFJ in the role of teacher, and it's like, oh, FE doesn't suit this task, NE doesn't suit this task, I need to supervise. Well, that goes with TE and SE. That's the social mission block of ESTJ. Rules enforcing. So it has this complementarity to it. So because the idea in Model G being that if those functions aren't appropriate to the task at hand, you switch to these other functions, and it's called a social adaptation shift. And so what I then did is I went through, and these are superego pairs, is I then looked through all of the superego pairs, and especially for the extroverts, I found that the roles were complementary. It's spooky. And so I created a diagram of it. I'll just, where did I put it? Infographics, sociotypes. No, I did it here. Is it sociotypes? No, it's explanation. That one. Comparison slides. No. Oh, there it is. That's it. Right. I'm afraid to say I was rather pleased with myself when I did this, because I thought, yes, I found a pattern. And I think it is spooky. So here, complementary roles. These are all the right extroverts. And so what I did is, as you see here, I lined them all up. And I thought, which four, and I want to pick four, one from each club, are the ones that go together in terms of complementary roles. And so I thought, okay, educator, what role is most suitable? If you were to ask an educator, which of these four roles would you like to be good at? That I think they would pick supervisor. Oh yeah, I've got to do supervising in my job. Now, the one that doesn't work is when it says modeler. That's supposed to be for ENTP. But what else is ENTP good at? Debater, communicating on an intellectual level. So, okay, that fits for ENFJ. And performer. So, ESFP is good at what? Performing, holding attention. So it's spooky. All of those four roles are complementary within a sort of benefit ring.
Would you think then that all of these types within their different temperament could do the same jobs well for different reasons?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard Jeff say that he would actually like to have been a teacher of little kids because he really liked little kids, and he liked it when his son Morgan was little. But what he would have trouble with would be like sticking to the rules of what has to be taught in a school. But he would very much have enjoyed that role. And you can see a lot of ENTPs that get into the lecturer role. I mean, an example, yeah, Richard Feynman. It was called The Great Explainer, Richard Feynman. And so you can see that, and then they're like, and you can see how ENTPs sort of perform to hold the attention. Now, Jack admitted to that in the first debate that we did that didn't end up being recorded. But my whole point is Model G is arranged in these benefit rings. And so you can see the similarities. Now, when it gets to the introverts, it's a little bit tricky, you know, because of the problem with the sensory introverts. And I have to finagle it a bit. But the point is that by using the Keirsey names for the role variants, for the Keirsey jobs, I was able to see the patterns. If I had used Victor's names for the types, it would have been harder for me to see the pattern between, say, educator and supervisor, because Victor's term would have been mentor and administrator. Although you could still say that an administrator role is useful in the school.
Right.
And so I'll go on to the other extroverts and then the introverts, because the pattern is easier. So, you know, when we went through the thing for supervisor and it mentioned financier and banker for ESFJ, well, and if you've got ENTJ there, mobilizer of resources, coordinator of resources, and that's the social adaptation shift. So this is the model G of ESFJ. That's the social mission. If they don't fit the task at hand, the type shifts to the social adaptation block, where you've got TENE. That's the social mission block of ENTJ. So the idea being that they are a smaller scale ENTJ. And Victor gives an example of that in the ESFJ profile, which I'll show in a moment, of the ESFJ being an event organizer. And you say, hang on a minute, that's a little bit like a smaller scale ENTJ, because you have to think strategically in the future in terms of, I've got to get all of this stuff and I've got to organize it, and this person has to do this and all this person has to do that. So smaller scale mobilizer of resources, because there's a lot to organize for a wedding. Right. So even though these two types are superego pairs, they have the same Gulenko temperament. They're both EJs. They're both left spinners, and they both have the same form of cognition. They are both vortex synergetic. So even though they're opposite in valued functions, they're an EJ, they're a left spinner, and they're the same form of cognition. So there are these other similarities between the types. And so this can be an example of people overvaluing quadras, even though they are super ego. In terms of the roles they are predisposed to, there is a complementarity there. And for this one's weird. ENFP and ESTP. Now, if you think about an ENFP, if you think about advocating and promoting, they are very similar. If you are advocating a cause, and sometimes you might say if a politician advocates a cause, but they start getting a little bit corrupt, and they might start to then it might start shifting into promoting, where it goes from advocating to promoting, promoter of schemes. And so you can maybe see as this, again, this is massive bias by me, of how the ENFP becomes unhealthy, is they start, because if you think about it, they can't be that idealistic all the while. They have to switch to being tactical. And it makes sense that they are going to do that because they're an EP, they're flexible active ENFP. And so they're going to have a tension within them between NF idealism and EP options, because they're usually quite 7-ish, aren't they, ENFPs? And so they're going to have a tension between advocator and promoter. So sometimes if you're advocating a cause, sometimes you might have to get a little bit tactical and a little bit sneaky. And maybe when an ESTP is really healthy and like they really believe in something, then they're going to be called maybe an advocate of the product. And then when they're really unhealthy, a con artist of it. Now, I saw something in Vanderhoek that when he wrote about what happens when the ENFP goes unhealthy, and it might relate to this. So you can see I'm about seeing the patterns. Right.
Does that have to relate to health, though? Because advocating and promoting can have very similar meaning.
I mean, I could say, we could say an advocator that gets really creative in their tactical ability and can like react to things on the ground quickly. You can say that's high side. Again, it's not Enneagram, high side, low side of promoter. And it's sort of like tactically nimble. I could see it. But there was a certain section. It was when Vanderhoek described, he wrote this about, this is a little bit cheeky, but this is where he wrote about when, because he was a psychiatrist, Vanderhoek. Other intuitive extroverts also may occasionally experience such a strange mixture of simple egotistical greed and cold, calculating opportunism, characteristics in marked contrast to their usual disinterested enthusiasm. They very readily forget such experiences, however, together with the actions to which they give rise. So you can see this, it goes with the idea of shifting. But I see it as an unhealthy shift. There's probably a healthy shift as well out there somewhere. Like I said, probably tactical advantage. And again, maybe if you see, maybe I can see this. ENFP in a situation where they have to adapt to it, you could say, oh, they've switched to acting a little bit ESTP-ish, a little bit expedient and creative and making best of the situation and putting strict principles to one side.
Or maybe you think about like maybe a vegan ENFP who really believes in the cause and advocates for it, and then gets to the point where they think this could be really good for everyone's health, and so they end up promoting it. They end up trying to make flyers and doing that kind of thing. Like, it could be done in healthy ways. Yeah,
that's the thing. And it's like you get it sometimes, and again, and Keirsey wrote about it in the Diplomatic Intellect, that there are unhealthy kinds of advocating, such as proselytizing. And I would say SJW stuff, if you like go too far and just on anything. It's like, again, I like the thing from Enneagram and Catherine Farber, high side, low side of any kind of role. And just for balance, ESTP is possibly the most likely to be the hero. That's what Kevin Dutton wrote. Actually, he said that about psychopaths, but he said they were the most likely to be the hero in an alternate reality. And I've got his book, The Good Psychopath's Guide to Success. And the reason he called it The Good Psychopath is that he's pretty much describing the STPs, and he was describing his father. And he was saying that all of the traits of the psychopath, and that it's a scale, those traits can actually be good traits: calmness under pressure, the ability to suppress emotions, can be very useful. And he wrote the book with Andy McNabb, who was ex-Special Forces, SAS, so a little bit like Delta Force, I suppose. I don't know what the equivalent American Special Forces, but think about US Navy SEALs or that kind of elite force where ESTP is good in that role. Also, to buff up the ESTPs, they're probably really good in the role of surgeon because of the tactical skill and very good under pressure. So what else have we got here?
Well, that's like Dario said, if you have high SE, like your brain will activate, go into a flow mode when you have a crisis. So like a lot of high SE people are good at like being EMTs, you know?
Yep.
High pressure, people are dying, like jump in and help.
Yeah, I'm gonna, I'll get back to that one. What's the other one? The other one is, we don't need to see that one, but I want to show the Vanderhoop one before we go. Yeah, Vanderhoop. Books, typology, Jungian compatible, conscious orientation, that one. Right, and then I should have put this on the screen before. Stop screen, share screen, that one. Right.
Did you have any thoughts, Natalie?
Yes.
On any of this?
It makes sense. I feel like I would have to read some of this in more depth. I don't have any comments right now. But
nobody else has talked about this on YouTube. This is like my own TI in terms of seeing the patterns, but I think there's something to it.
I've definitely, I feel like I've always noticed that similarity between opposite types with the same like and
Vertness?
Or whatever, like like ENTJ and ESFJ. Just certain things that didn't seem like they lined up with any theory, and now I'm finding out they do. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they do have the same form of cognition. They have the same Galenko temperament. So it's like ENTP and ESFP, both EPs, and both right spinners.
Natalie's an ISFJ, Destiny. Just so
right.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute. I know who that is. You should have joined us. That's. I know who that is. I know who that is. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say who that is, but I know who that is. She's a nice person, Destiny.
I was going to respond to something else in the comments too. Zaylin said, asking about if someone has a love-hate relationship with FE, I so relate to that. I feel like FE is, I love it when I can use it well, but it's also very draining. So I just wanted to address that.
Yeah. So Vanderhook was the first person, and I asked Shalina this. He was the first person to write 16 profiles. Because in this book you've got, actually in the previous book that it came out just after Psychological Types, he had all 16 in there, and and this is his 8-function model, and this is the 8-function model of ENFP, and look how much FE has got there as the demonstrative function, and he actually describes the demonstrative function of ENFP here when he says, here we go. Is that about? Yeah, that's about INTP. Yeah, he was talking about the polarity in the INTP. So the polarity is just when the type develops their opposite club functions. And so, like I said, this is like me now, I suppose. It's like you get a bit moralistic and that kind of thing. I think I've recently found out that I recently realized that my grandmother was ESI. So I don't know, I might be taken after her. So this might explain why INTPs can get ESFJ-ish and ESI-ish. And then there's the bit here about them is, and this is like high side, low side if they're going towards their soul image. In cases where, or rather their opposite, SF, the SF club. In cases where conflicts arise, feelings are under control of repressed, obsessional domestic character may be developed. That's on the low side. On the high side, but where there is greater freedom in thought, we get a morality founded on principles and reason, capable of giving rise to fresh insight into the life of feeling. The ordinary orientation of the introvert and thinking type may, that's INTP, or TI-DOM, as a consequence of this kind of complication, undergo considerable alteration. And so that is INTP. And look there how the second largest area is NI. And then you've got world as possibilities. And the way he describes it is here. So this is him describing TINX. Conscious orientation is in such a case directed chiefly to the subject's own systematic thought activity, and this more in regard to the aspect of form than of matter. Logical forms are experienced as something vital, originating in the self, and intuition makes it possible to arrive at a new vision of spiritual relationships. So I think that's the TI with the NI, as shown in the diagram, because Vanderhook was this type. And then, but when he says here, in regard to the world, because it's the world as possibilities. So when the type is extroverting, this is exactly the same as Victor's idea of territory. When INTP is on its territory, it's then more extroverted, and then I act a bit more ENFP-ish. And then here you've got, in regard to the world, such an individual is hampered in his vision by seeing it for the most part through the spectacles of his own opinions and conceptions. So the TI suppressing the NE. It is true that when he is in a more extroverted mood, his intuition will act more freely, and for this reason, the world will occasionally appear, even to this individual, what it constantly looks like to an intuitive extrovert, namely as a mass of possibilities and tasks. So that's very similar to Galenko's model, and it's where you've got the second strongest function as the Model A demonstrative, the Galenko creative. And so this is one of the reasons why I call this type TINX, where most of the time you've got TI with NI, and then sometimes, because the TI repressing the NE, as he said, looking at possibilities but through the lens of their TI. So there you go. And so that's why I call it TINX. Victor goes even further, and he calls this type, I think he calls it LT, for logic and time. Right. I've gone a little bit off topic, but I think people are interested. There's still at least 6 people interested who are watching. So when I get back to that, oh yes, I need to say the thing about FE in ENFPs. And not only that, is it sounds like the champion role. So, from the various possibilities to which polarity gives rise. Okay, polarity, like I said, that's just when the lower functions become conscious, the lower valued functions. Right. From the various possibilities to which polarity gives rise, I will select another example. An extroverted intuitive type with feeling as his secondary function. The mean field of consciousness of such an individual will be mainly occupied by the world, which reveals itself as a mass of possibilities and relationships, offering a constant succession of tasks to be performed. There's your NE. These tasks are, in such a case, mainly related to matters concerning feeling relationships. Where extroversion is marked, there will be a dependence on chance ideas and encounters, giving rise to a changeable, somewhat superficial enthusiasm for all kinds of opportunities in the way of self-expression and personal relationships. These people often possess a remarkable ability in the presentation of ideals and plans in a vivid manner, advocating, making use of their personal relationships to realize them. Owing to the charm which often characterizes these people, in whom feeling and intuition are combined, and to the persuasive force of their intuitions, advocating, promoting persuasion, they are often capable of exerting powerful influence. So he saw it. He saw this advocator predisposed role in ENFP. Then FI mode, when in a state of introversion, their subsidiary function manifests itself in a more independent form, so that one finds in their inner orientation a striving after a right attitude, such as one might find in an introvert of feeling type. But here it is less predominant. So there you go. That's Vanderhoop for you. 1937. It was translated, it was published in 1939. It was translated by Laura Hutton. There we go. Vanderhoop for the win. So what he's got in his descriptions, he's got them at all mental health levels, because he was a psychiatrist. He's got a whole part of the book. The first part of the book is describing functions and the types, and the second part is
You're muted again.
Muted.
Hi, Natalie.
Hi.
Just have a little ISFJ love fest.
Yes. Yay. Oh my gosh.
So I don't know what to talk about.
Oh,
I guess.
I was gonna say I'm gonna talk to a friend on the phone tonight, so I should probably go soon.
yeah. I'm gonna finish. Yep. I will heed that. I will heed that. So I'm just gonna go over. I'm just gonna have a quick glance at how it gets more complicated with the introverts because of the converting between Keirsey and socionics because of the sensory introverts. So, but there are some patterns. So, for example, when we looked at, remember when we like a ranger of contingencies, like making sure stuff's not going to go wrong. If this happens, I'll do this. And then you've got protecting. So you can see a little bit there. I think we talked about this before, Jamie, where we talked about there's a little bit of a similarity there, at least in predisposed roles between the INTJ with that minus TI, seeing things go wrong. And you can see here in the block that you've got, it's there. SDI is there in the social adaptation block of ILI. And it's the same charges. And so when you look at, say, SEI, it would be NI minus and TI plus. And so I would imagine it would be something like this. The focus of attention of INTJ many times being on, well, I'm going to plan it like this, and if that goes wrong, we'll do this and do this and do this. And then maybe then when it does go wrong, switch into, okay, how do I protect this situation? How do I secure this situation now that the thing that's gone wrong has actually happened? Whereas maybe your focus of attention is on the practical things. Yeah, she said she had to go, but that was okay. And then and then sometimes you'll have that focus of attention on avoiding trying to have that happen. But I suppose theoretically that would be harder for you to like do those kind of contingency plans.
I don't know if it would be harder. I just have to have the prep time, I guess. I don't know.
Right. Right. Okay. Yeah. And then again, things develop. As we know, people can get better at this, especially if you're a 6, you're going to be planning stuff out and probably as good as INTJ may be. And again, it depends what the stuff is. If it's within the logistical area, then I reckon, oh, I can plan out contingencies. I can plan out everything going wrong and have a backup plan. And I think Guardians are good at that. So we can see that there. Now, this is where it gets a little bit weird, because it depends on if we're saying that ISTP there, and if we're saying, say, ISTP with INFP, it depends what type you plug in. If you plug in Inspector, then you could say that the reconciler maybe has to, say if they're writing a novel, they have to inspect the plot, look at they have to craft it. So the sort of, see, it doesn't quite work as well, but it works a little bit. You can sort of see how they go together, maybe, but not as clear as Protector and Arranger.
Yeah, that's a bit of a stretch, I think.
Yeah, it's a bit of a stretch, yeah, and I'm honest about that. And then, now, this one's interesting, is when we think about, say, it depends how we define the type that's SITI. If we see SLI as the craftsman, and Victor calls INFJ, he calls IEI the lyric poet. That goes well, craftsman with lyric poet. That goes well. But it also goes well in this other role. IEI also is a good counsellor. Do you agree, like Keirsey, that INFJ, IEI, Yassinin can be good in the counsellor role?
I would. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And in that role, they have to inspect in terms of like find out what the problem is, inspect, it's sort of like find out, follow up. Has the person followed the advice that I said? Like inspect their body language, like little things. So there's sort of similarity there, a little bit of a stretch, but I can see it between inspector and counsellor, and then craftsman and lyric poet. And then this one is clearer between, again, roles. This is a clear comparison. But again, I know that ESI is not ISFP, possibly creative subtype of ESI. We would have to look into that with an ESI resembler. Shannon's a little bit in between ESI and SEI. She's definitely like ISFP and Keirsey Behrens Nardi line. Oh yes, Keirsey Behrens and Nardi. No, Keirsey Behrens, their names for the types are very similar to these. And I recently found out how they named their types. They did it from the inside and from the outside. And I'll finish with those in a moment. So if you see here, if you've got the designer and the composer, well, that's very similar. Imagine if you're writing a novel. You've got to design that plot. You've got to think strategically. You've got to maybe improvise a bit. So I can see, like, when I wrote my stage play, here it is. There it is on the screen, Wilma and Rena. It has been done. Here it is. I had to switch to ISFP mode and access those feelings of FI and SI and place myself at the center of a character. So I see those two as complementary. What do you reckon? Composer with designer.
I think that whole section is, because it's all about constructing something.
Yeah.
Lyric poet, craftsman, composer, designer, it all fits, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, this is the thing associated about the benefit ring. There was a theme to those 4.
Right.
And there's a theme to when we did it with that one. With the arranger, that's on the negative side, I suppose. Minimizing negatives with the arranger, inspector, reconciler, protector.
Potentially, yeah. That's a good way to categorize it.
And certainly with this, there's a creative aspect, I would say, with designer, composer. And again, it should be ESI. Their social role is guardian. Again, this is one of these things going to vary by subtype. I think it's possible for a creative subtype of ESI to be like a bit like Keirsey ISFP, because the creative subtype really does make the type a bit more like an artisan. I mean, I'm creative subtype of LII, which makes me closer to, and Jeff's creative subtype of ESFP, and 7-wing-6 like me. So again, other factors which make us closer than what our, although we do have communication difficulties, even though I've known him since 2013, we clash on the TI thing every now and then. But the weird thing is, when Jeff points out holes in my arguments, I think that's pretty good TI. Right, so there we go. I'll finish with this. But again, good at counselling and the arts. So these are some of the patterns I noticed. We'd say Tamsi. She both counsels and writes poetry. And I think many INFJ resemblers, they do the same thing. Or informal counsellor. And so there's something there. It's like they're predisposed to both roles. And I think any IF type is going to be predisposed to some kind of writing around character, just as Natalie here and you too. Jamie, yeah. So, and then at the end here, LSI, maybe depends on subtype. So those are what I noticed by putting the Keirsey, just plonking them in. I know some people are going to get very angry. The socionics purists will get very angry at me putting these names, sort of putting these Keirsey names on there. But it says something about the benefit rings. And Auschwitz did say that society moves forward because of benefit rings. And so the climax will be me going through these names of the, because one of the things we've got to say about Keirsey is that Dario and Linda Behrens' types are the same as the Keirsey types, and those are the types that he's got EEG evidence for. So there we go. And so, just the names of these types will show the similarities between them. So Keirsey name for ESTP, no, sorry, Behrens Nardi name for ESTP, and they worked on the names together, expedited promoter. That's exactly the same as it is in personology for ESTP, expedited promoter. ISTP has got analyzer operator. Keirsey called that type an operator as well. This one's different, motivated presenter for ESFP. Keirsey calls it the performer. Nardi Behrens call ISFP the composer. Keirsey also calls it the composer. We've got one here, implementer supervisor. Oh yeah, so the idea is that one of the names refers to the internal experience of the type, and one of them refers to the external appearance. So if you've got implementer supervisor, implementer's the inside, I suppose, supervisor's the outside role. And again, supervisor, same name. Planner inspector, same name as Keirsey. Facilitator caretaker is different. That's their name for ESFJ, but it sounds similar to what we went through before with the conservator role. Protector, they use the name protector. Protector supporter for ISFJ. Strategist mobilizer. That's Keirsey name, mobilizer. It's there. Where's mobilizer? There it is, mobilizer. Mobilizer research. Conceptual director. Keirsey hasn't got that one, but that's for INTJ. And he has them as the coordinators. Explorer inventor. Inventor's the same as the Keirsey name, inventor. Designer theorizer. I already showed you designer. Interestingly enough, Keirsey called it the designer after Behrens did, rather than before. Oh yes, and he calls, and they call, Keirsey Behrens call ENFJ the mentor. And that's what Victor calls ENFJ the mentor. Oh, here are some different ones. They call INFJ foreseer developer. So NI, discoverer advocate, advocator for ENFP, and then harmonizer clarifier for INFP. Harmonizer, reconciler. So it's the same types.
What do you find so interesting about them using the same identification for the types?
That they're describing the same types. And that's so important to me because this is the lens that Dario has used for typing people with his EEG research. And I asked him, Dario, how do you type people? Because in your book, you say you use the interstrength assessment, which was his own like a sort of inventory, like the MBTI, and he said that they use temperament and interaction style. So this goes back to what we started with. NT, like for you, that would be, oh, we're type people. Stabilizer. He'd use the word stabilizer, that mean guardian, and behind the scenes. Well, that's Keirsey, logistical accommodator, ISFJ in terms of the MBTI, and in functions, SIFX. So to me, that's important that Dario Nardi's reason and Linda Berens was taught by there. It's, oh, she put it on screen. They were, Linda and Dario are theory partners. There we go. David Keirsey for continuing to bring clarity to my understanding of people and introducing me to systems thinker. That's the reason why Keirsey was against functions, is because he was into systems thinker. And if people want to know more about systems thinking, look up Gregory Bateson. And I'm going to do a climax with 2 lines. I know you have to go. And that is, this is quite an NTP kind of joke, I suppose. All generalizations are wrong. And I didn't come up with that. That was in a book, in an NLP book. Now, Bandler and Grinder, I'm going to give the ESTP some love now by saying that Richard Bandler, ESTP, very smart. Grinder, I think ISTP, very smart, linguist. Their review of Gregory Bateson's book, An Ecology of Mind. Gregory Bateson, INTP, and I watched it with Amanda and she agrees, INTP for him. Their review of his book was this: simultaneously irrelevant and profound. And I think that describes INTP. We are simultaneously irrelevant and on a good day profound. So that's like all this stuff here might be simultaneously irrelevant and profound. Right then. So what was a review of this hangout? How do you think we went with going through the logistical intellect? Do you think there was like truth?
I think so. I mean, there's a lot of it that I agreed with and could see play out in my life. What about you, Natalie?
Yeah, I thought it was good. I thought it was interesting. It makes me want to do more research and just look into this stuff more, because I haven't looked into this angle as much. So, yeah.
You're muted again.
I think you're muted, Ben.
Oh. He's like, dang it.
Maybe we should.
Oh, I guess we're leaving, y'all. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, thanks.